Hello there, welcome back to Planet America. I'm John Barron.
And I'm Chaz Bicciardello.
This week we'll wrap up the latest 2024 presidential election news with a look at who's running and how they're faring.
We've got some fascinating developments in the Hunter Biden case and the extremely mature fat spat between Trump and Chris Christie. But first...
The US economy has been picking up pace for the past few months, but today, a little bit of a setback.
The Consumer Price Index shows prices climbed 3.2% in July compared to a year ago.
A small rise in inflation off the back of higher crude oil prices and a spike in energy consumption during the summer heat, but it could have an outsized political impact. It was Bill Clinton's campaign manager James Carville who famously summed up the central issue in the 1992 election with the phrase,
"It's the economy, stupid."
And Carville wrote those words on the wall of the campaign war room in Little Rock, Arkansas, so nobody would forget it. More than 3 decades on, and the economy is again centre stage. The good news for Joe Biden is that after the unprecedented disruption of the COVID pandemic and inflation fuelled in part by the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the US economy is basically booming and fears of recession are fading fast. President Biden has been out this week trying to sell what's been described as Bidenomics. Here he was in New Mexico.
We've created more jobs in 2 years than any president in American history has in 4-year terms. Unemployment has been below 4% for the longest period stretch in 50 years of American history.
Sounds pretty good, but the bad news for Joe Biden is that so far he's not really getting very much credit for those overall gains in the economy, Chaz.
Well, that's true. At the beginning of the year, the Bloomberg economic model put the chance of there being a recession this year at a modest 100%. And only 5 months ago, the Fed projected an unemployment rate by the end of this year of 4.5%. But by the time the second quarter GDP growth figures had dropped, everything changed. This is Fox Business News.
This, Maria, 2.4%.
Wow.
This is the first read, the advanced read for second quarter GDP. Estimate was only for 1.8%. Talk about a strong economy. There goes that recession talk, right?
That's Fox. And Morgan Stanley upgraded their growth forecast for the fourth quarter from 0.6% to 1.3% and upgraded their prediction for the first half of next year from 0.5% to 1.9%. And what's more, they specifically cited Biden's infrastructure bill as driving a boom in large-scale infrastructure. They're not kidding. This is easily the biggest manufacturing construction boom of the past 60 years. Look at that vertical line at the end. That is a 94% annual growth rate in factory construction. Once again, being attributed directly to Biden's infrastructure bills. And it's not just manufacturing. Unemployment across the board is back to the 50-year lows that Trump enjoyed before COVID. But even better, this post-COVID period has seen the most job openings for decades, which pushes up wages. Real wages for the lowest paid workers have been growing faster than at any time since the 1960s. In fact, just in the immediate post-COVID period, the economy reversed about 1/4 of the rise in wage inequality since 1980. And these new jobs, they're good jobs. Since the pandemic started, there are 4.1 million more full-time jobs, but 1.6 million fewer part-time jobs. So there are fewer underemployed people. And more people are enjoying their jobs as well, with job satisfaction reaching its highest point since that particular survey began in 1987. Most importantly, that inflation rate has finally dropped from 8.9% last year to something more in the normal range. So, Biden must be romping to re-election, right? No. Approval of how Joe Biden has handled the economy has dragged along at about 34% for over a year now. Even now, 65% of people describe the economy as fairly or very bad, with 58% of people still saying it's getting worse. And while the University of Michigan's Consumer Sentiment Index is improving, it's still comparable to what it was like at the depths of the GFC. The consumers have no confidence. So this is not good for Joe Biden. But why the disapproval when the economy is clearly doing at least okay? Well, not everything is smelling like roses. Yes, inflation has fallen to normal levels, but all the price rises from the last 3 years aren't just disappearing. You can see price levels are now 15% higher than they were at Biden's inauguration just 2.5 years ago. Yes, the poor are doing well at the moment, and wages generally are growing faster than inflation now, but wages fell behind inflation quite a lot in the last few years, and there's still some catching up to do, as you can see. Then there's interest rates. The Fed has raised interest rates 10 times in the last year, making mortgage payments a lot more expensive and driving housing prices down for the first time since the recession, and quite sharply too. So, higher payments for houses that are worth less? That makes people grumpy. And let's not forget that ratings agency Fitch just downgraded America's long-term credit rating from AAA to AA+ just this week. Yes, they blamed both parties for a deterioration in standards of governance over the last 20 years and a high and growing government debt burden and repeated debt limit standoffs, but it doesn't help Joe Biden make the case that the economy's going gangbusters, does it? So there is all of that. But finally, it takes time for an economic recovery to filter through to voters. The Clinton recovery started at the end of 1993, but the whole of 1994, his economic approval was in the low 40s. It took 3.5 years of GDP growth all the way to 1996 before his economic approval stayed above 50. And even then, 37% still believed the economy was either stagnant, in recession, or in depression. So, if the economy can keep this up for 12 months, Biden might be in a better electoral position. Then again, he might not.
Yeah, he could be running right out of time. Well, for more, we're joined from Washington, D.C. by Michael Strain. He's one of America's leading labour market economists and Director of Economic Policy at the conservative think tank, the American Enterprise Institute. Michael Strain, welcome back to Planet America.
Thanks for having me back.
So what's your take on this latest inflation data? The headline rate up, the underlying rate down. So is it good news or is it bad news?
Yeah, I think it could be the beginning of good news, but there's still quite a bit more work to be done. The underlying rate of inflation, when you kind of strip away the volatile components of inflation, continued to come in at a lower level than what we have seen. So now we've had 2 months in a row where underlying inflation, the so-called core CPI, has shown market improvement. If that can continue, and if we can establish a downward trend in underlying inflation, then that would suggest that there's optimism that the U.S. can get our inflation problem under control without having a recession. We're not there yet.
So if a recession is averted and inflation continues to moderate, can we then say that the stimulus spending from the Biden administration was well calibrated and targeted?
Well, I don't think we can say that. We've had overall headline inflation as high as 9% during this cycle. I think a good chunk of that is due to the American Rescue Plan, the economic stimulus President Biden signed in February of 2021. Not all of it, certainly. Some of that really high inflation was due to supply side issues with the economy. Some of that was due to Russia's brutal invasion of Ukraine. Some of that was due to the demand boost from the pandemic ending. Some of that was due to the $900 billion stimulus that President Trump signed in December of 2020 on his way out the door in his final full month in office. And so there were a lot of factors that were pushing up the rate of inflation. But I think the American Rescue Plan, the Biden stimulus, was certainly one of them. And I think if we had had a more appropriately sized stimulus in 2021, a stimulus that was much, much smaller than what President Biden pushed through, we could have had a lot of the benefits that came from the American Rescue Plan, from the Biden stimulus, in the form of a tight labor market, a rapid employment recovery, big declines in unemployment. We could have had those benefits without consumer price inflation that again was as high as 9%.
Generally speaking, Michael, how much influence do you think a president actually has on the economy? Or are they just riding a bucking bronco?
Well, I think the influence that a president can have on the economy is substantially overstated by the American news media. It's substantially overstated by politicians in both political parties. There are times when the president is riding a bucking bronco. Hopefully, what's happening more of the time is that the president is a passenger on a boat in a very calm sea. Either way, there is a real sense in which the president is along for the ride. There are, of course, some exceptions to that. The president appoints Federal Reserve governors, and the president appoints the head of the Federal Reserve. The Fed has a big influence on the economy. Presidents can, in times of economic downturns, have a big impact on fiscal policy stimulus, and that has a big impact for good or for ill on near-term economic performance. But I think overall, the president's impact on the economy is overstated.
It seems like income inequality is being reduced, not just in America, but around the world over the last few years. Is that just a temporary thing due to maybe COVID policies, or do you think the world could be entering a more egalitarian period?
It really depends on how you measure inequality. Are you talking about inequality of wages earned by workers? Are you talking about inequality of household income, which includes wages, but which also includes other sources of income? By my calculations, income inequality, kind of holistically measured, has been in decline for over 20 years. Wage inequality seems to have been declining, since a few years before the pandemic. The rate of decline has accelerated over the last couple of years because low-wage workers have really benefited disproportionately from the hot labor market we've had post-pandemic. This is an important development in the U.S. economy. Do I expect it to continue? I think that's hard to say. Someone's view on that question really will hinge on the anticipated effects of advances in technology like artificial intelligence. But I think there's good reason to think that inequality will continue to narrow or at least won't worsen.
Michael Strain, thanks for your time.
Thanks so much for having me. It's great to be on.
The campaign to be the Republican Party's presidential nominee in 2024 is certainly hotting up about now. And while Donald Trump continues to dominate early national polls, his rivals are building some momentum in early-to-vote states like Iowa, New Hampshire and South Carolina. And on the Democrat side, President Biden is facing a couple of unconventional challenges of his own. Here's who's in the running right now. Donald Trump's decision to run for president for the third time, despite twice being impeached and making false claims the 2020 election had been stolen from him, came as no surprise.
This will not be my campaign. This will be our campaign altogether.
At the time, many Republicans were beginning to doubt Trump's ability to win elections after several of his hand-picked candidates lost winnable midterm contests, costing the party control of the Senate.
That's not a red wave. That's nothing like a red wave.
Meanwhile, polls showed Trump's nearest rival, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, was gaining ground, even in some cases drawing ahead.
According to the poll, Republican primary voters have high interest in DeSantis as a potential 2024 presidential nominee and view him more favorably than they do the former president.
But it was former South Carolina governor and Trump's one-time UN ambassador Nikki Haley that emerged as his first official challenger for the Republican nomination in February.
And above all else, I'm a grateful American citizen who knows our best days are yet to come if we unite and fight to save our country.
A week later, another candidate with Indian heritage, businessman Vivek Ramaswamy, joined the race, declaring a war on wokeness.
This isn't just a political campaign. This is a cultural movement to create a new American dream for the next generation.
2 months later still, and former Arkansas Governor Asa Hutchinson, one of the few Republican leaders to dare criticise Donald Trump in office, announced he would also be running for president, representing the old party establishment against Trumpism.
I bring that same vigour to a fight in another battle, and that battle is for the future of our country and the soul of our party.
The field expanded further in April.
Conservative talk radio host Larry Elder is running for president. Elder just announced his 2024 run on Fox News.
Of course, in May, some bigger guns started to roll out, with South Carolina Senator Tim Scott joining what was by now an unusually diverse field, rejecting the idea that America holds minorities back.
And today, I'm living proof that America is the land of opportunity and not a land of oppression.
Ron DeSantis surprised nobody by announcing his presidential campaign in late May. More of a surprise was his decision to kick off his White House bid alongside Twitter owner Elon Musk in an odd, awkward, glitchy, audio-only chat.
All right, I think we're broadcasting. Man, I think we melted the internet there.
Yeah, that was insane. Sorry. I'm actually doing this from David Sax's Twitter account because it looks like doing it from mine basically broke the Twitter system.
That set the early narrative of a DeSantis campaign with great expectations struggling to find its feet. Trump's former Vice President Mike Pence, meanwhile, announced that he would try and wrestle the Republican nomination away from his former boss in June, gently encouraging Trump supporters to move on.
We can defend our liberties and give America a new beginning for life. But it'll require new leadership in the White House and the Republican Party.
Former New Jersey Governor and 2016 presidential candidate Chris Christie also flipped from staunch Trump ally to rival in June, denying that he was on a mission to destroy Donald Trump while delivering some very unflattering character assessments of his former friend.
A lonely, self-consumed, self-serving mirror hog is not a leader.
Since then, 3 more Republican presidential candidates have emerged. North Dakota's Central Casting Governor Doug Burgum, Miami Mayor Francis Suarez, who looks more like he's running for a slightly better job, but maybe not president, and former Texas Congressman Will Hurd, a longtime Trump critic and former CIA agent. His announcement came on CBS.
I believe the Republican Party can be the party that talks about the future, not the past.
But of the dozen Republican candidates, not all are going to meet the polling or fundraising requirements to qualify for the upcoming debates. Or they may even balk at a pledge to support their eventual nominee, as Trump did himself in 2016.
Raise your hand now if you won't make that pledge tonight. Mr. Trump.
Meanwhile, President Joe Biden is facing 2 challenges for the Democratic presidential nomination, although neither is seen as really serious as a threat at this stage. Wellness guru Marianne Williamson is running for a second time, clearly looking to help set a more progressive agenda rather than to actually beat Biden for the nomination.
We all owe President Biden a debt of gratitude for defeating President Trump in 2020. But with the things that they're going to be throwing at us in 2024, we need to submit to the American people an agenda of fundamental economic reform.
But if name recognition and political pedigree counts for anything, perhaps Biden's greatest potential rival is Robert Kennedy Jr., son of the late Senator Bobby Kennedy and nephew of JFK, and Teddy, the last Kennedy to challenge an incumbent Democratic president.
My mission over the next 18 months of this campaign and throughout my presidency will be to end the corrupt merger of state and corporate power.
Well, Robert Kennedy has courted controversy by fanning vaccine fears and promoting a lot of COVID conspiracies. He's also suffering from a neurological disorder that makes his voice very raspy. President Biden will also be probably keeping a bit of an eye on academic Cornel West. He's a former Bernie Sanders booster, and he's launched a left-wing third-party campaign for president, which could also drain progressive support next year. So, with all that going on, the long campaign for the White House in 2024 is well and truly underway. And once again, Planet America is along for the ride. Well, if you thought that last week's third criminal indictment of former President Trump might put a little bit of a dent in his polling numbers, you'd be wrong. The first poll taken after Special Counsel Jack Smith charged Trump over his attempt to steal the 2020 election has Trump extending his lead. Trump has 59% support, according to Morning Consult this week. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis is the only other candidate in double digits on 16%. By the way, DeSantis sacked his campaign manager this week. Anti-woke businessman Vivek Ramaswamy is next, ahead of former Veep Mike Pence, and Haley, Scott and Christie all tied on just 3% support. The same poll, by the way, has Biden leading Trump by a single point nationally, and Biden leads DeSantis by 5 points, not helping the Florida governor's electability argument. And by way of historical context, at this point in the last competitive Republican primary back in 2016, Trump had just taken the lead. Jeb Bush, at that point in freefall, support for another early frontrunner, Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker. Remember him? It was fading fast. Trump's support was just in the low 20s though at the time. More than half of Republican voters were shopping around for somebody else. Ben Carson, Mike Huckabee, Ted Cruz, Marco Rubio, even Rand Paul got a look in. And at around this point, early to mid-August in 2012, another Republican governor who'd attracted some early interest, Rick Perry of Texas, was bumbling his way back down in the polls after a summer boomlet. Republicans spent the next few months shopping around, with primary voters taking a look at Michelle Bachmann, Herman Cain, Newt Gingrich, even Rick Santorum, before they finally settled, of course, on Mitt Romney. It's worth noting, though, that no Republican or Democrat frontrunner in national polls has opened a lead of more than 20 points without winning their party's nomination, and Trump's lead is basically double that already. So history says he is in a very strong position, notwithstanding the impact of future court appearances.
But now it's time for everyone's favourite sting.
Hunter, always seeking, wanting to know. Hunter, what's it sound like? How does it go? If you see...
I hope this investigation goes forever so I can keep playing the sting.
Clearly.
Look, last week I told you about the allegations that Hunter Biden inappropriately leveraged his dad's position to make at least $17 million. Sorry, make that at least $20 million. That's the number this week. That foreign entities then paid various members of the Biden family. But note the word family, not Joe Biden. Republicans have tracked down precisely $0 paid to Joe Biden himself, and it's hard for Republicans to make a case for a
Joe Biden bribery scandal
if they can't find a bribe. But hang on. The Oversight Committee Chair James Comer correctly notes that payments to family members can be a bribe. Plenty of payments to family members, and that is absolutely true. If those payments corruptly influence someone to do something. But what are they saying Joe Biden did for that supposed money? The only thing I'm seeing that Joe Biden's even been accused of doing for most of those people is attending an occasional dinner that they were at. Is that it? Not much of a
Joe Biden bribery scandal.
Which is why the case of Viktor Shokin is so important. Viktor Shokin was the Ukrainian prosecutor general between February 2015 and March 2016. The Republican theory is that Ukrainian gas company Burisma paid Hunter Biden $83,000 per month to protect them against investigations from the likes of Shokin. Republicans say Shokin was investigating Burisma a bit too hard, so Burisma got Joe Biden to have Shokin sacked.
And I had gotten a commitment from Poroshenko and from Yatsenyuk that they would take action against the state prosecutor, and they didn't. So they said they were walking out to press conference. I said, no, I said, I'm not going to, or we're not going to give you the $1 billion. They said, you have no authority. You're not the president. The president said. I said, call him. I said, I'm telling you, you're not getting the $1 billion. I said, you're not getting the $1 billion. I'm going to be leaving here. And I think it was, 6 hours? I looked, I said, I'm leaving in 6 hours. If the prosecutor's not fired, you're not getting the money. Well, son of a bitch. Got fired.
And their evidence of that pressuring that Biden was talking about there was inappropriate comes from Shokin himself, who wrote in an affidavit that the truth is that I was forced out because I was leading a wide-ranging corruption probe into Burisma Holdings, and Joe Biden's son, Hunter Biden, was a member of the board of directors. Now, obviously Shokin might be taking revenge on Joe Biden there. He might not be telling the truth, but there's also the confidential source I mentioned last week, who claims in an unverified verified report that when talking about how Shokin's investigation into Burisma would have a substantial negative impact on Burisma, the owner of Burisma, Mikola Zlochevsky, said something like, "Don't worry, Hunter will take care of all of those issues through his dad." Unverified! And finally, we have the fact that only weeks before he was sacked, Shokin's department actually seized Zlochevsky's assets. 6 properties and a sports car. Now that suggests Shokin was indeed looking into Burisma. Now, there's been some suggestion that in that case there, Shokin was simply executing a court order that had been in place for over a year before Shokin was made Prosecutor General. I don't know if that's for sure. It's hard to tell. This stuff's very murky. But anyway, that's the Republican evidence that Shokin was investigating Burisma. The conventional view, though, is that Shokin was actually fired because he wasn't investigating corruption from companies like Burisma. So Joe Biden pushing for him to be sacked in that case would have nothing to do with Hunter Biden and would be legit. Now, their evidence is that Biden wasn't the only one who wanted to see Shokin fired. The IMF, the European Union, US government bureaucrats, foreign investors and Ukrainian anti-corruption activists all said at the time that Shokin was soft on corruption. So if they're all involved, that would be a pretty big conspiracy. One of the few Ukrainian bureaucrats that America trusts, Vitaly Kasko, who was Shokin's deputy at the time, also says there was no pressure from any American to close cases against Burisma. He said the Burisma cases were already shelved by Ukrainian prosecutors back in 2014 and 2015, and that was against his advice, I might add. Finally, it seems that the American plan to push Shokin out didn't even come from Biden. The Americans say it came from officials at the embassy in Kyiv. Now, you might recall during the first impeachment, the State Department's George Kent went into some detail about that. He went on for quite a while, so I won't play it, but add that all up, and I personally suspect that Shokin's sacking was legit. I suspect, but it's hard to be 100% sure. Which is why it was so important when Hunter's good friend and fellow Burisma board member Devon Archer said this about Joe Biden in sworn testimony last week.
Let's look at what Devon Archer testified today. He said that not only was Joe Biden on the phone over 20 times with people, including the Burisma executives, talking about whatever, even though the president denied that he never spoke to any of these people.
Hold on, stop it. Biden was on the phone 20 times to these business people saying, whatever. That's huge. The only problem is Devon Archer's testimony wasn't filmed. That's why we were listening to James Comer talk about it. And we didn't get a transcript till days after he was talking about what happened. But now we do have a transcript, and this is actually what Devon Archer said. You know, Hunter speaks to his dad every day. And so in certain circumstances, if your dad calls you at dinner and he picks up the phone, there's a conversation. Aha! So Joe Biden wasn't speaking to the business partners. He was checking in on Hunter, who at the time was a mess, if you recall, and then Hunter would put him on speakerphone, undoubtedly to show off Hunter's value to his business partners. And that's not what I said. That's what Devon Archer said in the transcript. But what were they talking about on these calls? According to Archer, they said things like, where are you? How's the weather? How's the fishing? How's the whatever it may be? But you know, it was very casual conversations, not about cap tables or financials or anything like that. Now, I laughed when I heard they supposedly talked about the weather. I just thought that was incredibly unlikely, but that is what Devon Archer said. You might not believe him, but he said that, and Republicans are pretending he said something else. But what about Shokin? He's meant to be the smoking gun for Republicans.
But at the end of the day, he admitted that the Burisma executives were squeezing Hunter Biden to try to do everything he could to get the prosecutor, Shokin, fired because they were going after their corrupt energy company. And lo and behold, a few days later, Joe Biden actually did that.
Wow. So they were squeezing Hunter Biden to get Shokin fired because he was going after Burisma. That's what Devon Archer said. Not quite. Archer said, the narrative that was spun to me was that Shokin was under control and that Shokin being fired was not good because he was like under control as relates to Lekevsky. Remember, he's the owner of Burisma. I have no way to verify that, but that was what I was led to believe. So that was like the direct opposite of what Republicans claimed that Archer said. Then again, you can't blame James Comer for getting Archer's testimony wrong because he didn't even attend the hearing, not in person and not on Zoom. So that there is the cherry on top of all this. Now, look, John, I'm not surprised that Devon Archer didn't dump all over his mate.
Sure.
You'd expect that.
They're besties. They served on the board together.
Totally. Maybe he was lying. Maybe James Comer is going to find a smoking gun any day now that implicates Joe Biden. All I'm saying is that given his apparent willingness to just make up evidence if he thinks he can get away with it, it's going to be pretty hard to believe James Comer if he does actually find any dirt on Joe Biden.
Yeah, and right now it's looking like a bit of a nothing burger. But after all of that, a little comic relief.
When you take a shower, I like to have, I have this gorgeous head of hair. When I take a shower, I want water to pour down on me. When you go into these new homes with showers, the water drips down slowly, slowly. You have suds, beautiful, nice, wonderful suds, a lot of money, Procter & Gamble, all that crap that they say is good. Probably cost them about 2 cents and they sell it for $10. But you can't, it takes you 10 minutes to wash your hair. You know what you do? You just stay in the shower about 10 times longer than you would have. It's the same. You probably use more water.
Yeah, it's time for a fireside chat. And Chaz, news today that Special Counsel Jack Smith wants the January 6th case against former President Donald Trump to start on the 2nd of January next year. That is just 2 weeks before the first in the nation Iowa caucuses, which also happens to be the day that Donald Trump's second defamation trial involving E. Jean Carroll is slated to start. Plenty to ponder for the former president this week, yet he seems to have spent most of his time goading former friend and presidential rival Chris Christie about his weight.
Sir, please do not call him a fat pig. That's very disrespectful. Don't call him. See, I'm trying to be nice. Don't call him a fat pig.
Well, Chris Christie hit back at that, calling Trump a coward if he fails to show up for this month's Republican presidential debate.
You want to say something? 2 weeks from tonight, show up. I'll be on the stage. You want to have the conversation? I'm happy to have the conversation.
He wants to have the conversation, and that inspired this response from Trump.
I was extremely respectful of sloppy Chris Christie today in New Hampshire during a speech in front of a large crowd of patriots. Somebody shouted out, Chris Christie is a fat pig, rather than acknowledging that, which many speakers would have done. I said, no, he's not a fat pig. I'm sure Chris would have been very happy with my defense of him.
Well, clearly Chris wasn't. Now, for the record, Chas, Chris Christie used to weigh in at close to 150 kilograms. He had lap band surgery about a decade ago. He's now believed to be around 110 kilos, and that is very close to Donald Trump's estimated weight, based on his medical reports, of 115 kilograms, although the big difference, of course, is Donald Trump is 10 centimetres taller than Chris Christie at that weight. And that debate, by the way, it's in a week and a half from now. Donald Trump does not seem likely to show up in a field of maybe 7 or 8 Republican candidates. But my question to you is, should Donald Trump take part in that debate?
I'm going to answer that in a second, but I just want to quickly say that Chris Christie is not above making jokes about Trump's weight either. Because in response to previous, this is not the first time they've done this.
No.
This particular tango.
Yeah.
And Chris Christie has observed things like, I've seen him play golf. He's not exactly a Greek god himself.
Yeah, right.
Like, so Chris Christie can dish it out as well. Yeah. The answer to your question is no, he shouldn't debate. He shouldn't debate. There's a few reasons. Number one, from his perspective, he absolutely shouldn't debate. He's 40 points ahead. The only way he can lose this is if he loses it, is if he does something really, really dumb. The only time he can do something dumb that enough people see it, that will have an effect, is in a debate. Yeah. So it's actually the smart play is to not... Why would he put himself at risk? There's no point whatsoever.
Chris Christie would and is saying, Trump may well be the nominee. He is leading in the polls, but, Jeb Bush led in polls, Scott Walker led in polls. People can lead in polls. You can't take it for granted. You have to go and win it, and you've got to take a part in the exchange of ideas on a debate stage.
Look, normally I'm all for that. I in the past have gone on. I think there should be more debates and all that kind of stuff. But Trump is different, and the reason he's different is because he's been the president. People know the reason you need to have debates is so people can see what you're like under pressure, so you can be put under heat. Everyone knows everything there is to know about Donald Trump in every circumstance, okay? He's been president. We've seen him under the blowtorch. We know everything about him. We know exactly what he'll do.
But don't you want to see him and Chris Christie making fat jokes about each other on a debate stage?
Of course I do. While it doesn't suit... Well, it's not good for Donald Trump for him to debate, and it's not good for the other candidates because they need to shine. When Donald Trump's there, he sucks out all the oxygen. Right. So it's actually good for the other candidates, for at least for the first few debates, for Trump to not be there, so they can radiate their own personality.
Yeah.
It's good for everyone for him not to be on debate, except for us looking for entertainment.
Yeah.
So of course I want him to do it. Do the debate, Donald.
Now, it's
interesting. It's not his interest.
Well, I wonder as well how much of this is payback because Fox News has been sort of really trying to boost Ron DeSantis for the last 6 months or so, and Trump is very unhappy with Fox News. He may well win them back again, as he did in 2016. This first debate is on Fox News. The second debate, though, it's going to be hosted at the Reagan Presidential Library, which is, I guess, the biggest of the Republican debates. It's where you want to be seen to be, even though Nancy's not around anymore. It is still a bit of a rite of passage for Republicans to be there. The question is, if Trump doesn't go to that, is he also saying Ronald Reagan doesn't matter anymore? This is the party of Donald Trump. If you want to debate me, I'll do it in Trump Tower or at Mar-a-Lago.
Ronald Reagan does not matter anymore. I'm sorry. like the Republican Party is not the Republican Party of Ronald Reagan. I saw a poll just the other day. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but where they compared the three legs of the Reaganism stool to from then to today, and for each of those legs, they were things like America needs a strong presence overseas, and about small government, and it went from 65% agreement amongst Republicans to 20% amongst agreement amongst Republicans today. Reagan is dead, literally and metaphorically now, as far as the Republican Party goes. It's not going to cost Trump any more than him getting up there and slagging off George W. Bush in the primaries 4 years ago.
Well, we haven't seen him slagging off Ronald Reagan, but I guess that could be next. Now, there was a really interesting vote in the state of Ohio this week, the Buckeye State. The first thing to say about this, though, it is very unusual to hold an election or a referendum or a ballot initiative in the month of August because many Americans are still on their summer vacation. Turns out that was probably pretty much the idea. On the ballot was a proposition known as Issue 1. It was put by the Republican-dominated state legislature to increase the threshold for changing the state constitution in the future from 50% change to 60% to change. This is all an attempt to stop another amendment enshrining abortion rights from passing when it goes on the ballot later this year. Already the polls suggest, Chaz, that it has clear majority support, but it could struggle to reach 60%. Now, in the end, the vote this week, it was defeated. The no vote won with 57% of the vote. So that threshold does not change, which is good if you are in favour of abortion access. There won't be a ban. There was only half the turnout of what there was, though, in the last presidential election. About 3 or 4 million people turned out to vote in all this, so it was still a lowish turnout.
Yeah, but when you say lowish turnout, extremely highish turnout for a ballot question.
Right.
Like we're talking a 35% turnout for a ballot question in August, which, as you said, is, in fact, until now, they passed a law in January in Ohio to ban August ballot questions because they have such low turnouts. It's their summer holiday.
And then somebody thought, except if low turnout helps us, because traditionally Conservatives, older Republicans, are the ones who vote in low turnout elections.
Yeah, and because they wanted to get in front of the abortion amendment, as you say. But my point is, the last ballot question wasn't in August. It was in May, which is a much better time to have ballot questions. That got 18% turnout, half the turnout of this ballot question. So that is huge.
Yeah.
So that is a huge turnout. It was actually massive. And I think given that what was going on here was that essentially the Republican legislature were asking people to vote away their ability to vote things up.
Yes.
which is very strange.
Yeah.
Given that what was going on, I thought people showed an admirable understanding of what was going on with what they voted. And I'll tell you what I mean.
Do you think they were voting for their own democratic rights rather than their and others' abortion rights?
No, they were voting for abortion. I will... Well, let me tell the punchline, and then I'll go back. The punchline is that there have been 3 polls in the last few weeks about people in Ohio's views on abortion laws, and in particular the abortion proposition that's coming up. Guess what the average approval is?
Tell me.
57%. Guess what the vote was? 57%. They're clearly voting for abortion when they're voting for that. But that's okay, because that's really what was going on here. Like there was this surface debate as if they were voting about some minor administrative procedure or something. And like Frank LaRose, who's the Secretary of State in Ohio, was making this ridiculous argument that what they were actually voting about was stopping special interests.
Outside spending.
Yeah, from coming in, hijacking and making people vote for things. You can't make people vote for something. They agree with you or they don't agree with you. But it actually reflected, it was really interesting, the ads weren't about that. What they were supposed to be voting. The ads were about anything but the actual question. The Democrats, their ads, they weren't even necessarily about abortion. They went even further and they made it about contraception.
Do you have a condom?
Yeah. No! Sorry, you can't use those.
What are you talking about? Who are you?
I'm your Republican congressman. Now that we're in charge, we're banning birth control.
This is our decision, not yours. Get out of our bedroom.
I won the last election. I'm not going anywhere. I'm just gonna watch and make sure you don't do anything illegal.
There's a real Hannibal Lecter vibe in that.
Yeah, kind of creepy,
But as the Republicans, they were taking opposite tack. Once again, not talking about what was actually on the ballot. They were talking about, what might come down the road because of this. But they went even more ridiculous.
Caught. The out-of-state groups fighting Issue 1 keep saying it's just about abortion. But it's not, and they know it. These special interest groups encourage minors to get sex change surgeries and want to trash parental consent. On social media, they brag. Planned Parenthood knows it's not just about abortion. They said it goes hand in hand with sex change surgeries. Urge says parental consent laws are unethical and need to be abolished. It's obvious. The reason these groups are in Ohio is to encourage sex changes and cut parents out of life-changing decisions.
Okay, so this is the garbage they were being fed on the air, but the people saw straight through that. They knew this was actually a proxy vote for abortion, and they voted that way.
Yeah,
they
so
proved they should have the vote.
We also asked friend of the show, Larry Sabato from the University of Virginia, for his thoughts on this Ohio result and what it might tell us about the potency of the abortion issue heading into next year's presidential election cycle.
It gives very good insight into the strength of this issue, and it's not the first signal we've had. 7 states now have voted on abortion directly or indirectly since the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade prior to the 22 midterm elections. In every single case, including states that are deeply conservative and very Republican, the pro-choice side on abortion has won. Ohio is just the latest example, and of course it was a landslide, 57% to 43%. So the Supreme Court didn't mean to help the Democrats, but they have very much helped them and positioned them better for the 2024 presidential and other races.
And Larry, do abortion measures need to literally be on the ballot through propositions and referenda, or is it just enough that it will be in the back of the minds of voters when they go out to vote next year?
Well, it helps to have it on the ballot. And some states are going to. In fact, Democrats in many places are working overtime to make sure they get the signatures and do everything they need to get those things on the ballot in the states where that's possible. In some states, they don't have referenda on issues, and they're just not going to be able to get abortion to help them in the same way they can in other places. But when it's on the ballot, it will really assist Democrats. But even where it's not on the ballot, it's going to help them. Surprisingly, it helps them in some deeply Democratic places, deep blue territory like New York, less than it does in purple competitive states or even in some Republican red states. And that's because in heavily blue states like California and New York, the pro-choice side has the law, they have the governor, they have all the other statewide officials, they have the state legislature. So they're not terribly worried. People are not terribly worried about losing their abortion rights. It's in the competitive states where most voters understand that they're just a few seats away from losing those rights and having a lot of other things done in the culture wars.
And just on that, John, the potency of abortion as an issue has been proven. I've got the stats right here. There have been 6 statewide votes on abortion since Dobbs. In 500 out of 510 counties in those 6 states, access to abortion outperformed President Biden's 2020 results by an average of 26 points. So abortion is incredibly popular, even amongst Republicans who supposedly are against it. So this is a real potential electoral force over the next few years. And in 2024, they've got abortion ballot measures already expected in Florida, South Dakota and Arizona. I'm guessing there'll be more.
Yeah, I think you're right. Before we go this week, another issue that's all kind of wrapped around the spokes of social and cultural issues in the United States. The United States women's soccer team was knocked out of the Football World Cup this week in a dramatic penalty shootout against Sweden. That was a big shock for the top-ranked American side who were aiming for their 3rd consecutive World Cup. But the greater shock was the reaction from some back home, like Conservative political commentator Benny Johnson, who gleefully tweeted about what he called the woke US women's soccer humiliation. And Team USA's downfall was delivered by anti-American, anti-woman activist Megan Rapinoe. Well, embarrassing free kick here. He means penalty kick, of course. And obviously there was this from the former president.
Many of our players were openly hostile to America. No other country behaved in such a manner or even close. Woke equals failure. Nice shot, Megan. The USA is going to hell. MAGA.
And another Megyn Kelly, the former Fox News host, was outraged that some players weren't singing the Star-Spangled Banner before the game.
There is not a one who is actually singing and who looks proud to be there. Not one. Not one. So get off. Get out of there. You know how many young girls would give anything to represent the United States of America?
So pretty much Conservatives hate their women's soccer team. This all goes back to 2016 when Rapinoe and some of her teammates took a knee after Colin Kaepernick's lead protesting racial injustice, but then FIFA banned taking a knee during an anthem. So Rapinoe and others decided that they would remain standing but silent during the singing of the anthem. And at the same time, they were also involved in a big court battle. They were suing for equal pay with male players. And then after the last World Cup, the American team declined an invitation by Trump to go and visit the White House in protest of what they saw as his anti-LGBTIQ policies. They have openly supported a lot of gay and trans causes, and that's apparently enough to be dismissed as woke and anti-American these days, Chaz, but it's pretty remarkable. Americans, very patriotic, love their sport. They, on the right, they've turned on this team.
Yeah, look, I got to say, I have complete understanding of why the right might not be a big fan of Megan Rapinoe. Not only is she wears her politics on her sleeve, she's very, very left.
Yeah.
But on top of that...
She's also, for a long time, the best player in the world for the best team in the world, so she had a platform.
Totally. But also, it's not just that she's left, she is very aggressively left. Like when she turned down going to the White House, she did it with an F word. She goes out of her way to be confrontational about her politics. So of course they're not going to like her. But I find that's one thing to not like her personally or to think she shouldn't be so political. It's another thing to start cheering against the team. If she annoys you, just don't watch it.
Yeah.
There's
also something beyond that as well, which is I think about the Conservatives in the United States. Who are the people they don't like protesting? Colin Kaepernick, a black man. Megan Rapinoe, a same-sex attracted woman. It's the people they think deserve to have an opinion and those they think don't deserve to have an opinion.
Look, maybe. I just think it's just about her being aggressively left. To be honest, I don't think they like any aggressively left-wing people, and I don't think they mind if you're black or you're gay, as long as you're a Republican, right? So, but all I would say is if you don't like politics in sport, don't accelerate the cycle by being even more political in response, which is what we're seeing here. If you don't like politics in sport, take it out from your side as well. And as for Megyn Kelly, it's a good thing she's not Australian because she would go spare at the fact that our athletes don't even know the Australian anthem.
Yeah.
But anyway.
Look, that's it for another trip to Planet America, though.
We're going to be back at the same time next week and anytime on ABC, iView, YouTube or Facebook. Don't forget the Pet Podcast right there for even more American politics.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.